for this story came out of a story I wrote about this woman who was she was an art teacher for about 2,000 kids at a middle school. Well, it was K through 8. And there were 2,000 kids at this school. She was the lone arts teacher now. After years of cuts, she was the stalwart lady there. And I was talking with her, and she had received a preliminary pink slip notice just this past year. And she was like, that's it. I only see maybe, she saw 5 sections a day, 30 kids, let's say, 150 kids. And you know, they rotated through. She saw a very small percentage to begin with of those 2,000 kids. And it wasn't like her case is unique. It's happening all over the county, all over the state. I mean, frankly, all over the country. And so, you know, she got a pink slip. I mean, she ended up losing her position. What happens to those 2,000 kids remains to be seen. What we want to look into is what happens to arts education when you cut. What are the groups that are stepping in? Where is that education going? You know, is it piano lessons outside, orchestra, youth orchestra? We have also a huge number of things happening online these days. People can, you know, they can take lessons by correspondence. You can do your theory with a teacher over at Juilliard and continue to be at school here. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can happen. And, you know, after decades of cuts, there should be some sort of statistical way of also looking at just where is that money going? Where is public funding for arts education? Where's that going? Where has it gone? What are the statistical amounts of, I mean, what students are exposed to that within the public school system? The numbers that are doing things outside of that? Who's being left out? You know, if you don't have the extra funding to do it yourself, doesn't matter. There's a lot going on now in education specifically. I cover education at KPCC, so that's kind of the reason for this idea. But there's a lot going on about, you know, how can the U.S. reformulate itself to make it competitive globally in the world of education? You know, one idea is, well, does everyone need to know? I don't know if you guys saw the New York Times editorial, algebra, who needs it? Was not bad. Who needs to know algebra now? Some people don't, is the argument. And it got a lot of interesting responses. Well, you could say that for arts. Do people need to know arts? Is it possible to know less of arts now? And we're trying to reframe this question. And one of the things that have come up in the education world is, well, maybe there can be several paths. You know, in a lot of countries they do the math science path, the humanities path. And one of these concepts is also having an arts path. Well, if an arts path is a core idea that some people are perhaps better suited to the arts, or that some people who might have trouble with math and science or reading and, you know, and English in general are very expressive and able to find that their calling in the world of arts, which for that matter actually a lot of continuation schools, they do a lot of arts education there, drama, what have you, to bring kids into an education system that is more holistic and less about what's right and wrong, and more about learning together and working collectively in a group. So, I mean, the idea is to really look at, can we look at arts education today and say what has happened over the last couple decades in a more tangible and less abstract way, but then also sort of tell those stories of institutions that have stepped in and what is happening in a very new and different way in a modern world. And that's basically the gist of it. I mean, I can go on, but that's it.
I think that question is very international. Well, I come from Finland, which is one of the best, has the best education system in the world, or right after South Korea, I think we are at the moment, and we have the same thing. Budget cuts on arts education at the moment, and it's a very global issue. I think it's very interesting.
I mean, this might just be my background, but frankly, as someone who's new to California, one of the first, we talk about addressing some of the history on, you know, if you're going to cover public spaces, what's the history of that space? I think of some sort of chart, some sort of flow chart, some sort of graphic to explain how arts funding works, because I don't frankly know how schools, I don't know how much is ad valorem, how much is bond issue, how much is state kick-in. I don't know how that works in California.
Right, and it's been proposed to have that change as well. So where the money comes from in terms of the governor's budget included this year a change to how funding happens. So without getting too much into the funding weeds, essentially it is very different. And also, if you just did a simple graph of funding, per student and where that's going these days and how that's changed over the last couple of decades, I think it's very instructive. And frankly, is arts education the same for a high schooler versus a middle schooler versus an elementary student?
That was part of what I was going to ask, what you do for arts education, and I'm sure things are getting cut unevenly between, maybe you really don't want to be the state legislator who is cutting funding for kindergartners with paint, but will very happily cut, high school pre-professional programs. And also, my question was about whether you wanted to focus more on the pre-professional, the people who are going to become artists, or whether you're interested in, the amateurs who become the audience and who need arts education in order to appreciate the work that artists are doing. It seems like this is a huge, massive topic with different levels of education, each with different funding mishigas, and different tracks, each with different funding mishigas. Are we covering all of this? Is there a particular focus that y'all are interested in?
I think that it's really an open question. I think that it requires a lot more discussion because it's so it's such an organic topic. We could sit here for the next hour and sort of throw ideas around. And does it matter if a person understands amateur art or if they become the audience? Do we care as a society? That's a question as well. Does it really influence things ultimately? And I don't know how we would quantify that, but I think it's a question that deserves to be asked, and I think we should try. I spoke with an AP art history teacher who told me that he's the only AP art history teacher for their school. He brought the program there, and if he left, it would disappear. And frankly, he has very little reason to stay. But he said last year he did a program about basically offensive art, like offensive art across the globe. He brought in offensive art, all sorts of different things, brought it in the middle of the class, put it up on the slides, and the conversations and discussions that occurred in terms of philosophy, ethics, morals, there were all sorts of issues that he was able to bring to the plate, in terms of even current events. And that's arts education also. So the question could also be, it ties into what, Juan and Reed are doing, what is the arts? What is arts education even? And what does that, how is that delivered?
If I may say one thing, I think that there's, beyond the production and the reception of art, I think that there's a lot of, there are pedagogical discussions that are going on about integrating the arts into teaching the humanities and math and all these other things that, for funders, when you look at why the Creative Economy Report was created, it's basically to show funders that there is some return on investment for the arts. And I think that in the education world, with the funding for the arts, I think that a lot of people are trying to figure out, is there a return to embed these artistic practices and process within the learning of other content areas? And that is very tied to a lot of the discussion of funding, demographics, economy, ethnicity, geography. There's a civil rights lawyer that went out to look at different neighborhoods across California, looking at the relationship between obesity and the use of physical education in schools. And he sued the LEM5 school district, the San Diego school, 5 school districts. Santa Ana, it's the city project, and they sued them because they said, the fact that you're not teaching kids 1 hour of physical education is having these results, and now he's thinking of doing it the same thing in terms of arts. If schools don't provide arts, this is what is going to happen, and it will become a civil rights issue very easily.
Well, and you've got to ask who has access to arts education now. I mean, and again, I raised that earlier, but who's being shut out? If things have moved online, if things have moved to community groups, who is not able to learn to play an instrument or learn to do paper mache collage? I mean, we also we're lucky here in that we have there are arts magnets, there are arts schools, and that's a place where arts has been a focus, but perhaps the detriment, I might say, of other subjects. If people are being forced to take arts, maybe they're not learning that. Maybe they're not. I mean, and the question remains. I mean, it's a discovery process, and the effort is, I think, in following up on these various strands and seeing what is actually happening in schools where arts are a focus, where they're not a focus. I mean, it's hard to say.
Do you have any results already? What happens if there's no art teaching? Have you seen any?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of stories about it. I mean, for decades there's been stuff in the media. Media's covered slowly the decline of the arts, but there hasn't been a real step back and sort of a.
But what happens to the kids if they haven't been taught any arts?
Well, no, I do think that there have been a lot of like statistical work that has been done at the county level.
And UCLA did a big report and found out that without arts, there's a lot more violence.
Oh.
So there's a correlation there.
That may even be cited, the Irvine Foundation thing we had to read
Right.
had a couple of pages about the salutary social benefits of having arts participation.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting to see how when there are no arts in places like, for example, South LA, they create their own artistic forms, like Crump, which we just talked or looked at, or that like the public art that they create is also a very interesting angle as well.
Which goes back to where,
Right.
right?